Welcome to the brutal life of a medieval farmer. No days off, no coffee. Hey, have you ever thought about what life was like for a farmer back in the Middle Ages? No smartphones, no tractors, not even a comfy pair of boots. Just dirt, sweat, and sun from dawn till dusk. Sounds tough, right? Well, it was way tougher than you might imagine. Imagine waking up before the sun even rises, stepping out into a chilly, dark morning, and knowing that your whole day will be spent bent over the earth, pulling weeds, plowing fields, and hauling heavy loads, all with wooden tools that barely get the job done. There were no machines, no shortcuts. If the weather was bad, the work didn't stop. And if you were sick or injured, tough luck. You just had to push through. Here's a crazy fact to put things in perspective. Most medieval farmers didn't sleep more than 5 hours a night. That's right, 5 hours. Meanwhile, today we complain if we don't get our 8. And forget about coffee or breakfast bars. Food was scarce, and what they ate barely gave enough energy to keep going. Now it wasn't just about hard work. Life was a constant fight against hunger, disease, and the unpredictable world around them. One bad harvest could mean starvation. One injury could end their ability to work forever. And on top of that, they owed almost everything they produced to a lord or landowner. Basically, you worked your fingers to the bone and barely kept your family alive. Sounds brutal, huh? Well, hold on. This is just the start. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to take you on a journey through the daily grind of a medieval farmer's life. From cracked hands to terrifying winters, from taxing landlords to desperate prayers, it was a world where survival wasn't guaranteed and comfort was a foreign idea. So the question is, could you do it? Could you live a life with no days off, no modern medicine, no break, and still come back for more every single day? Let's dive in and find out. Early mornings and no breakfast, the harsh reality of a medieval farmer's day. Start all right, so you think waking up early is tough? Imagine having to get out of bed before the sun even thinks about rising, and no cozy alarm clock, just the crowing rooster or the chill in the air. For medieval farmers, the day started in near darkness, usually around 4 or 5 a.m. And trust me, it wasn't because they were morning people. It was because the work wouldn't wait. No jumping out of bed and grabbing a quick coffee or a smoothie either. Nope. Breakfast was often just a chunk of stale bread or maybe some leftover porridge if you were lucky. Protein? Forget it. Fresh fruit or eggs were luxuries, not everyday staples. Sometimes they didn't eat at all before heading out to work because hunger was just part of the deal. Then came the real challenge, starting work with hands stiff from the cold and a body that hadn't fully woken up yet. The fields were muddy, tools were heavy and primitive. Think wooden plows pulled by oxen or horses, and the work demanded strength, patience, and a serious tolerance for pain. Every movement was exhausting, and breaks were few and far between. Here's a wild fact. Medieval farmers often slept less than 5 hours a night, and their days were packed with backbreaking labor from before dawn until after dusk. Imagine doing hard manual work for 14, sometimes 16 hours a day, and then getting just a few hours to rest before starting all over again. No weekends, no holidays, no mental health days. And it wasn't just the physical exhaustion. The mental toll of knowing that if you didn't work hard enough, your family might starve was huge. There was no safety net, no unemployment benefits. If the crops failed, it meant disaster for everyone. It's funny to think about how today people complain about waking up early or having a long workday. They hit the snooze button, grab a latte, and sit at a desk with air conditioning. Meanwhile, medieval farmers were out there literally breaking their backs, facing harsh weather, hunger, and zero comfort. So next time your alarm goes off and you feel like whining about an early start, just remember this. Those medieval farmers would probably laugh and then go back to plowing fields until dark. Ready to find out what those grueling hours in the fields were really like? Stick around, because this story just keeps getting tougher. The land, friend, foe, and relentless challenge. So you're out in the fields, right? But here's the catch. The land itself wasn't exactly your best buddy. Far from it. Medieval farmland was often tough, rocky, and stubborn as a mule. You didn't just plant seeds and wait for the magic to happen, you had to wrestle with the soil every step of the way. First off, the tools. Imagine trying to plow fields with a wooden plow, sometimes barely sharper than a stick, pulled by oxen or horses who were as tired as you were. No tractors, no fancy irrigation systems, just pure muscle power. And when the soil was full of rocks or heavy clay, that plow barely scratched the surface. Farmers had to clear stones by hand, which could take hours or even days before planting even began. Plus, there was no fertilizer like we have today. No miracle nutrients to boost the soil. Mostly, they relied on manure, animal poop, to keep the land alive. That's a smelly job on its own. And even with all that effort, the soil could easily become tired and less productive year after year. Now, add weather to the mix. Too much rain and your crops would drown. Too little and they'd dry up. And pests? They were everywhere, ready to gobble up whatever you managed to grow. It's estimated that up to 90% of a harvest could be wiped out by bad weather or bugs. Imagine working all year and then, poof, your entire crop disappears. Here's a real kicker. If a farmer lost his harvest, it wasn't just a bad season. It could mean starvation for his whole family. And remember, they owed part of their crop to the local lord, so often they ended up with barely enough to eat themselves. One story from the time tells of a farmer who cleared his land for weeks, planted seeds, and then a sudden flood destroyed everything overnight. He was left with nothing but mud and broken dreams. That was a risk they lived with constantly. And just when you think you've beaten the land into submission, the soil could betray you again the next year. Farming wasn't a guaranteed paycheck. It was a daily gamble. So imagine waking up every day, knowing the land might crush your hopes with one bad storm. Would you have the patience and grit to keep going? Next up, we'll talk about what life was like off the fields, the home, the family, and the struggle to survive outside the dirt. Life beyond the fields, home, family, and endless struggles. All right, so you've spent all day battling the land. But the day didn't end there. After sunset, the medieval farmer still had to deal with life at home, which, spoiler alert, was far from cozy. Most farmers lived in tiny, cramped cottages made from wood, mud, or sometimes stone. These homes had dirt floors, small windows covered with animal hide or thin cloth, and barely enough space for the whole family to sleep. No heating, no plumbing, just a single hearth fire to keep the place warm, which also served as the stove for cooking. Winter nights could be freezing, and the smoke from the fire made the air thick and hard to breathe. Food was another constant worry. The diet was simple and often monotonous, mostly bread, some pottage, a kind of stew, and maybe a bit of cheese or salted meat if they were lucky. Fresh vegetables and fruits were rare treats. And don't even think about sweets. Sugar was expensive and mostly reserved for the rich. Malnutrition was common, which made people weaker and more vulnerable to diseases. Speaking of family, everyone had to pitch in. From the youngest kids to the oldest grandparents, there was work to be done. Kids started helping in the fields as soon as they could walk, and their playtime was often limited. Education? Forget it. Most medieval farmers couldn't read or write. Their school was the daily grind, learning by doing. Here's a harsh truth. Child mortality rates were sky high. Many children didn't live past the age of 10 because of disease, poor nutrition, and the harsh living conditions. It was a brutal reality that shaped the whole community. Even with all the hardships, family was the backbone of survival. They shared what little they had and leaned on each other when times got tough. The community spirit was strong, but every year was a fight to stay alive. Imagine coming home after a day that left your muscles screaming, only to face a cold, dark house with little food and a family counting on you to do it all again tomorrow. It's no wonder medieval farmers were some of the toughest people ever. So, while today you might complain about a long commute or a rough day at work, remember that these folks faced real struggles, both in the fields and at home, that made every day a battle for survival. Ready to hear about the dangers of injury and disease that haunted them without any real medicine? Coming up next, injury and illness. No doctors, no mercy. So you're working all day in the fields, bending over with a heavy wooden plow or hauling buckets of water, and then, bam, you slip, cut yourself on a sharp tool, or twist an ankle. In today's world, you'd probably head to a clinic or at least grab some bandages and antibiotics. But in the Middle Ages? Forget about it. Medieval farmers didn't have doctors waiting nearby, no hospitals, and definitely no modern medicine. If you got hurt, you were mostly on your own. The closest thing to medical help might be a local healer or a wise woman who knew a few herbal remedies. Think garlic, honey, or nettle leaves smeared on wounds, mixed with a prayer or two. Sounds rough, right? Now here's a sobering fact. Many injuries that seem minor today, like cuts or infections, could turn deadly back then. Without antibiotics, an infection could spread fast and become fatal. A simple cut might lead to gangrene. And broken bones? They healed badly, or not at all, often leaving the person crippled for life. Diseases were everywhere, too. Malnutrition weakened immune systems, and filthy living conditions spread illnesses like the plague, dysentery, or typhoid. These weren't just occasional problems, they were constant threats. Whole villages could be wiped out by an outbreak in a matter of weeks. Here's a grim story. During the Black Death in the 14th century, some farming communities lost up to half their population. Imagine the chaos. Fields left unplowed, families torn apart, and no one left strong enough to keep the land alive. Despite all this, farmers kept working. Why? Because they had no choice. If you couldn't work, you couldn't feed your family. It was a harsh cycle. Get injured or sick, keep pushing, or face starvation. And get this. In many places, even injured farmers were expected to pay taxes or work for their lords. No sick days, no exceptions. The pressure was relentless. So, when you stub your toe or feel under the weather, remember that medieval farmers faced way worse, with almost no help. They had to be tough, stubborn, and sometimes just plain lucky to survive. Next, we'll dive into how the weather could be just as deadly as disease, because the forces of nature weren't on their side. Weather and natural disasters. Nature's unforgiving fury. If you think your daily commute or bad weather ruins your day, try living as a medieval farmer. For them, the weather wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a matter of life and death. Nature could be their best friend, giving them sun and rain just right to grow crops. But more often, it was their worst enemy, striking with storms, droughts, and freezing winters that could wipe out everything they had worked so hard for. Imagine this. You've spent months planting and tending your crops. You've battled stones, pests, and exhaustion. Then, out of nowhere, a week of heavy rain floods the fields, drowning your plants in mud. Or worse, a sudden frost kills off seedlings before they have a chance to grow. And when the sun disappeared behind dark clouds for too long, famine wasn't far behind. Here's a shocking fact. Between 1315 and 1317, Europe faced the Great Famine, one of the worst in history. Relentless rains and cold weather ruined harvests across the continent. Millions of people starved. Families that had barely survived the hard work of farming faced hunger on a scale they'd never known. But it wasn't just rain or cold. Droughts could be just as cruel, drying out the soil and turning once fertile fields to dust. Locust swarms, floods, and wildfires were constant threats, too. The medieval farmer had to expect the unexpected and pray that nature would give mercy. The unpredictability was maddening. One year might be bountiful, and the next year complete disaster. Saving food for winter was tough when you didn't know if you'd even have a harvest to save. And don't forget, without modern weather forecasts, farmers had to rely on old sayings, animal behavior, and stars to predict the coming weather. Spoiler, it wasn't very accurate. So when you complain about a rainy day or a cold snap, remember the medieval farmers who faced storms that could mean starvation and still got up the next morning to try again. Next up, how feudal taxes and forced labor sucked the little life out of these hard-working farmers. You won't want to miss it. The crushing burden, taxes, feudal lords, and forced labor. So, after all that backbreaking work battling the land, the weather, and the daily grind, you might think a medieval farmer could finally catch a break, at least with what they grew. Nope. Here's where the system really got cruel. Medieval farmers didn't own the land they worked on. Most were serfs or peasants, tied to the land owned by a local lord or noble. That meant a big chunk, sometimes half or more, of their harvest was taken away as taxes or rent. They barely kept enough to feed their families. Think about it. You spend all year sowing, tending, and harvesting your crops, only to hand over the majority to someone who might not even lift a finger to help. It's like working overtime and having your paycheck cut in half. Harsh, right? But wait, there's more. Taxes weren't just in food or money. Farmers also owed labor. This meant working on the Lord's lands for free several days a week, especially during busy seasons like planting or harvest. This forced labor, called corvée, was exhausting. You had your own fields to tend, but you had to drop everything to work for the Lord without pay. And if you wanted to marry, move, or pass land to your children, you usually had to get the Lord's permission. Your freedom was seriously limited. Here's a fun but sad fact. Some lords demanded fees for grinding grain at their mills, baking bread in their ovens, or even using the local wine press. Imagine paying someone just to use a communal oven after working all day in the fields. The law was stacked against the farmers, and rebellion was dangerous and rare. Most people just accepted their fate because survival depended on staying in the Lord's good graces. So, after the sun went down and the fields were finally empty, farmers had to face the reality that they worked to fill someone else's pockets, and sometimes barely scraped by themselves. It's no wonder that medieval farmers are remembered as some of the toughest and most resilient people in history. Could you have lived under such pressure? Next time, we'll explore how communities supported each other and found moments of joy amidst all the hardship. Because even in the hardest times, people found ways to live, and sometimes laugh. Community, festivals, and moments of joy, finding light in the darkness. So, we've talked a lot about the brutal, relentless grind of medieval farming, but life wasn't all misery. Believe it or not, even in the toughest times, medieval farmers found ways to connect, celebrate, and catch a breath from their hard lives. First off, community was everything. These farming families weren't isolated. They lived in villages where neighbors depended on each other, sharing tools, swapping seeds, helping with big tasks like harvest or building were common. When one family was struggling, others pitched in. It wasn't charity, it was survival. And when the long, hard work was done, well, sometimes there was a reason to celebrate. Medieval Europe had plenty of festivals, many tied to the agricultural calendar or religious holidays. Harvest festivals were a big deal. Imagine a whole village coming together to feast, dance, and share what they'd worked so hard for. These festivals weren't just fun, they were vital for mental health. They broke up the monotony, gave people a chance to laugh, sing, and forget the endless toil for a little while. And guess what? Music, dancing, storytelling, and even games were all part of the package. Here's a cool fact. Some villages had special mummers' plays, where locals put on funny or spooky performances wearing masks and costumes. It was a chance to shake off the seriousness and just be silly. Even religious events offered hope. Many believed their prayers could protect their crops or bring relief from illness. Faith was a powerful force, giving strength to face another day. Of course, life was still hard. There was no escaping that. But these moments of joy and community helped farmers keep going. After all, humans have a remarkable way of finding light in the darkest times. So yeah, life as a medieval farmer was brutal, no doubt about it. But it was also full of grit, resilience, and yes, even laughter. Next up, we'll take a closer look at the role of technology. Tiny innovations that made a huge difference, even in those tough times. Small innovations, big impact, medieval farming technology. So, we've been talking about how brutal life was for medieval farmers, but here's something that might surprise you. They weren't just stuck in the Stone Age. In fact, a few key inventions made their lives just a bit easier, and sometimes even saved entire harvests. Take the heavy plow, for example. Early medieval farmers used simple scratch plows which barely turned over the thick European soil. Then came the heavy plow, a game changer. It was stronger and deeper, allowing farmers to break up tougher ground, which meant more land could be farmed and crops could grow better. That might sound small, but it was huge. Another innovation was the horse collar. Before this, farmers used oxen for most work because horses couldn't pull heavy loads without choking. The horse collar changed that by distributing the weight more comfortably across a horse's shoulders, making horses faster and more efficient plowers and transporters. Suddenly, farming was less slow and exhausting. Water mills and windmills also started popping up, grinding grain faster than any human could. This freed up precious time and energy. Instead of grinding grain by hand all day, farmers could focus on other tasks. Crop rotation was another smart idea. Instead of planting the same crop in the same field year after year, draining the soil, farmers learned to rotate crops. This helped keep the land fertile and reduce the risk of total crop failure. But let's be honest, despite these advances, the work was still insanely hard. These tools didn't mean easy days. They just helped push back the impossible a little bit. Here's a cool fact. Some farmers use simple wooden seed drills to plant seeds in neat rows instead of scattering them by hand. This made plants grow stronger and easier to harvest. Even small ideas like that made a big difference. So, while medieval farmers were battling nature and feudal lords, they were also inventing and adapting. Their creativity helped shape farming for centuries to come. Next time, we'll wrap this up by asking the big question. Could you survive the life of a medieval farmer? And what can we learn from their brutal, inspiring story? Could you do it? Reflecting on the brutal life of a medieval farmer. All right, so now we've taken a deep dive into what life was really like for medieval farmers. The endless work, the backbreaking labor, the uncertain weather, the harsh living conditions, and the crushing demands from feudal lords. The big question is, could you have done it? If you think about it, the answer might surprise you. It wasn't just physical strength that mattered. Sure, being tough was essential, but so was patience, stubbornness, and a strong sense of community. You had to wake up every day not knowing if your crops would survive, if your family would have enough to eat, or if you'd make it through the winter. That's a kind of courage that's hard to imagine today. Plus, life was full of moments where hope flickered. Harvest festivals, helping neighbors, small inventions that made work a bit easier. Even in the darkest times, people found reasons to keep going. Today, it's easy to take our comforts for granted. We grumble about traffic, bad coffee, or long meetings. But medieval farmers? They faced true survival every day. Their resilience helped shape the world we live in. So next time you bite into a sandwich or enjoy a sunny day, think about those farmers who worked the soil with their bare hands, faced storms and sickness, and kept farming anyway. Could you do it? Maybe not every day, but you can definitely respect the incredible grit it took. Thanks for joining this journey into the brutal, fascinating life of medieval farmers. Stay curious, stay tough, and maybe, just maybe, give your morning alarm a little less hate.